How is
Oh my
that even
God, we
possible?
don't. There's no quote at the beginning of that chapter. What happened? I checked. I double checked. There's no quote.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing there. So I guess we could open by quoting Andrew Douglas himself.
Oh my God, where's the quote?
In quotations, Andrew Douglas.
That
Well,
would
you
actually be that actually might be kind of funny.
open up talking about when you were 17 and you were teaching at Piping Hot Summer Drummer. That
Yes.
I'm assuming that would have been the first time you taught at Piping Hot Summer Drummer, right? At 17 years old. You weren't teaching
G-
before then?
Good question. I was either 16 or 17. I can't remember exactly which. But it was my first year in the SFU pipe band. I remember being pretty kind of surprised. First of all, I was only vaguely aware that it was a thing, you know, came
Mhm.
up in conversation, and I was only vaguely aware that, oh, Jack and Reed and the SFU pipe band put on like a summer school, and I was just thinking, oh, okay, whatever. And then Jack is basically says, oh yeah, I want you to teach at the school, and I was like, oh, okay. I just kind of assumed it was like maybe a thing where a few people came out, but anyway, once you get up the hill, you realize it's like this massive gulch of just
Deal.
well, it's a super huge deal. It was the biggest piping school I'd ever seen in my whole life, and still is, I think.
Yeah, and
Um,
until
eh
calm before the winter storm takes it over, of course, but yeah,
well,
up
no, we
until
have
then,
a
yes.
cap of I mean, we might have the best name,
Yeah.
and that's in dispute, but no, we have a cap of 20 people,
Okay.
so
So
no.
Piping Hot Summer Drummer will remain huge.
Yeah, I think so. But anyway, it was this big amazing thing, and I found myself teaching, on the staff of this really cool thing. It was like a big
Do you f
aha moment for me.
do you feel like that's the kind of experience where, looking back, it's a good thing you were young and somewhat ignorant, because if you'd known what a big deal it was, you would never have been able to do it?
I would have been able to do it. I have chronic overconfidence in my ability to do anything. So I would have been able to do it, but yeah, no, it really helped to be young and naive just to
Yeah.
get, just to get started with teaching because of course, the more old and wise you get, it's a strong case of the more you learn, the less you know
Yeah.
in a lot of different respects. So yeah, so it was a great place to be young and naive too, because you had, Jack and Terry and Reed Maxwell, and then, all of these super experienced pipers in the SFU pipe band. So they were always able to nudge you in a better direction when you
Mm.
inevitably faux pod with your teaching.
So, speaking of better directions, you mentioned at the beginning of the chapter that among many other things that you were learning from Jack, one that really stands out is, well, his focus, certainly, but first and foremost, his focus on making piping fun.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that at that time, that was actually a difficult thing for you to take in. And I'm curious, I mean, you mentioned that it's not that you disagreed with him, but is it just that piping was already so fun for you that you didn't understand why that would need to be I mean, I'm thinking about when I was playing pipes at 17, it definitely wasn't work at that point, right? And so is
Right.
that why it was weird for you that you were like, "What do you mean? Of course it's fun."
Yeah, maybe. I think there's a little bit of that, and I think that there's also a little bit of the other side of things. I think we talked about that in a recent episode, falling in love with the problem. So I think at that point, you're already kind of in love with the problem. And
Mm,
so to just come on out and get to work on extremely, gut wrenchingly difficult tasks. I think to
and
me, that's already, by the time you're a professional piper playing an SFU pipe band, you're already there. You're already like, that's what you do on a day to day basis and you've learned to enjoy it. But that's not normal for a beginning student. So I think it's both ends of that continuum, right? So it's, yeah, of course it's fun. It's bagpiping. Hello. But also it's like, yeah, so now that we have the basic idea of how we might tune our drones, let's just do it at 15,000 times real quick.
yeah. It's the
You know,
monotony of the tasks so often, isn't it? That's really killer.
Yeah. So there's a disconnect. I think there's a disconnect between teacher and student oftentimes. And
Mm,
by the way, and then it tends to be a huge one. I think certainly maybe if you're less experienced, it's like my idea of fun is very different than
yeah.
the idea of somebody who really just does this as kind of like a knee jerk fun hobby thing.
Yeah. My kids are gonna hate me someday for so many reasons, and one of them will definitely be bringing them up so often when talking to you about learning music, but I can't help
Yes.
thinking about my kids trying to learn piano right now, and other instruments too, and how when we are working on something, whether it's like a crossover where their fingers need to cross under, when they're playing a piano scale or something difficult for them, they'll work on it and work on it and work on it, and they'll get it right one time, and they'll go,
Mhm.
"Ah, there, I'm done," and they'll wanna get up and walk away from the piano, and I'll say, "Nope,
Yes.
come back. Now that you got it right one time, we're gonna get it right 15 times in a row, then you can get up."
And even 15 times in a row doesn't necessarily mean you've got it either, but I think
Right,
odds are
yeah,
better. Yeah.
yep.
And I think we've had that discussion on the podcast too, I hope. The discussion of striving for unconscious competence.
Oh, I thought you meant the discussion of me being a terrible father.
Well,
I
I
see.
mean, that's just how we get started each day.
Yeah,
But the power of unconscious competence is amazing. But
yeah,
yeah, when you're a young kid, that would be one thing. But when you're just starting something out, yeah, that temptation is always there as well. So I did it once. It's, yeah, cool, bro.
yeah,
Or maybe that's a good example of how to keep it fun is just let them have that and just,
yeah,
because what comes next is actually probably the hard part.
yeah.
It's,
The,
you're capable of it, but to reproduce it is, painfully difficult thing.
Yeah, and to be able to reproduce it, like, on command consistently, in your next performance or when you're passing it off for your instructor or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
But the very bagpipey thing that comes to my mind when thinking about this is when we were starting the pipe band that we have here locally, after we'd been playing for a year or 2, we were talking about, just as a band, how we really wanted our community band to be very fun. We wanted it to be very family focused, so we had often a member of the band or a spouse, someone would be there to kind of help wrangle kids so people could show up with their little kids and still be able to play, because a lot of what we were doing was bringing pipers and drummers out of retirement, as it were, because they were in that kind of phase of life and saying, "This is a very chill kind of environment. Just come as you are and play if you can and stuff."
Yeah.
But we were talking about how there's a balance where it's fun to be chill, but it's also really fun to get better, and it's fun to feel good about your performance, and it's fun to win, those things are fun too. And like you mentioned here,
I don't have fun being chill, Jim.
yeah, we all fall somewhere on that spectrum, don't we? But you do
Yeah.
mention in here, you say that the bagpipe freedom process could be easily criticized from afar as being not fun. And I feel like this is part of that, right? Where it's like, I can totally see that, how someone could look at the everything the dojo does really, including the tuning clinic that you've recently put together, right? That and be like, "That is not fun," right? But, like, what I'm trying to get
Mm.
across to my kids when I say, "No, we're gonna do it 12 more times," is that if you go through that, maybe you can find a way to make that fun, but certainly what you come out with on the other end, knowing your instrument better, having cleaner fingers, and being able to express yourself through that music, that's really fun, and so it proves
Mhm.
itself worthwhile, you know?
Totally. Well, do you want would you rather have a Porsche, okay? Or would you rather just have complete financial freedom in 10 years? You could have a
Mm.
Porsche today or complete financial freedom for the rest of your life beginning in 10 years. Which one do you pick?
I'm kind of irresponsible. That's
I
really
know,
kind of
right?
hard.
Well, the Porsche is tempting, and the Porsche would
Yeah.
be a lot more fun right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. And then I also think, yeah. And so, but meanwhile, the correct answer to that question is financial freedom forever.
But
Yeah.
no, wait,
As a
but
result
Andrew,
of 10 years of work.
we've gotta adjust that question. It's gotta be more like,
Okay.
would you rather have 15 sets of bagpipes right now,
Right.
right? Or financial freedom in 10 years?
Yeah.
Settle for 4 sets of bagpipes now and achieve financial freedom later.
Yeah. So it's definitely a bit of a delayed gratification issue, I
Mhm.
think, as well. Right.
Yeah.
So you can play really crappy bagpipe stuff, right? You can do a
Mhm.
really crappy job and you can go play parades and people are going to love it. You can have the fun equivalent of a Porsche. It can be done. And
Mm.
unfortunately, in my opinion, unfortunately, a lot of people are perfectly fine with that. But that's a shame. And not because of some snobby guy that likes to listen to P-Brock and go to Oban and Inverness. Not because I'm a snobby guy and wish that everyone played great, but because I wish that people saw that with just a little bit of effort applied across a couple years, like the fun level, right? And just talking about bagpipe freedom in general. If you can work and get yourself to that point, what lays in front of you is really infinite, like next level transcendent fun.
Yeah, I get that. You see it as unfortunate because you can see how much more fun they could be having if they keep grinding a little longer, keep pushing a little harder.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's the burden of any teacher, right?
Mhm.
Like, if you're a math teacher, seventh grade math teacher, it's too bad Timmy just likes chasing the girls. Because if he sat down and he worked on his math, like he could have a lifetime of really awesome math
Mm.
stuff.
Yeah.
I think seriously though, I think it might be the burden of any teacher is like you see the potential, but for whatever reason, the student is either perfectly content with just like the layer one
Mhm.
fun, or fun or utility. Like in school, it's just, I just got to get 95, right? So I get
Mm.
good grades, right? And that was like probably me in a lot of subjects at school where I would have had a lot of potential, but I wasn't interested in that. I was just basically interested in bagpipes,
Yeah. I
you know?
mean, I can relate to that, though for me, it was more like, I just gotta get 54%, and I can get
Right.
out of here.
Exactly. But so it might be the burden of any teacher because you see the potential
Yeah.
and the student is not getting it. Now, meanwhile, maybe you could say a great teacher is someone who's good at bridging the gap,
Mm.
like Laura Dern from October Sky.
Oh, what a great movie.
I every now and then I come across that movie and you're like, darn, I'm just gonna have to watch this again
Yeah.
because it's so
So
great.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you do mention in here, and I think that this is a great insight, that you suggest that it's not the hard work that pipers hate, it's the empty result,
Ooh,
that's what
yeah,
they hate. So
yeah,
maybe could you dig into that a little bit for me and tell me a little bit more about that idea? Because that strikes me as important.
for sure. Why do people choose the Porsche today?
Mm.
It's not a
'Cause
good
it's
choice.
cool, it's
However,
fun.
well, but then how and then there's no guarantee of
Mm.
financial freedom in 10 years. Like there's a lot of risk
Yeah.
in the work, right? So, and you can sense that. So it's like, dang, I better strike while the iron's hot. Porsche, let's go. Even though the Porsche loses half its value the moment you drive it off the lot
Yeah,
and all
but
that
it's
stuff.
like, I'm gonna have fun while I can, because yeah,
Yes.
tomorrow is not guaranteed.
Exactly right. And so what tends to happen with bagpiping is you do start to get into it, you do start to have a little bit of fun, but then, most people, a shockingly depressingly high number of people hit a plateau pretty early on that they can never get over.
Mm.
And that's for a variety of reasons. Usually the reason is that teachers are unable to help them get to the next level, either because the teachers are stuck themselves,
Mm.
right? Or the teacher could be a great player, but they're just not doing a good job communicating the important concepts.
Mm.
Like the
It
perfect vanilla example of that is most people, most teachers, even really great players that teach. The thing I see all the time that just drives me bananas is even pure beginners get fully embellished scores to work on. Hey,
Mm.
go home and learn this for next week. It's like, whoa, whoa.
Mm.
All those embellishments are there. And we don't really have a good scale navigation without crossing noises yet. That's the
Mhm.
good vanilla example. Well,
Yeah.
that's not good teaching. And what that does, unfortunately, is it instills bad habits almost immediately, right?
Mm.
And then now you have to unravel your bad habits for months or years before you can then build good habits for months or years again. So, all of those things happen, right? And we build in the bad habits. And then people get to a point where, man, so now you get to a point where you're no longer satisfied with just playing the parades and
Yeah.
getting the beer spilled all over you, but that's like basically the most fun you can hope for. So have you ever met a piper who's just sort of just permanently parade piping And
Mm, yeah.
it's like basically the only reason they even do that is because they bought the set of pipes and, they feel guilty about not using them, and then that's all you do.
Yeah. Yeah, that and also maybe adding a little nuance to the picture. Sometimes there's still a good social aspect to it or something like that. So there's still some satisfaction coming from it, but they want to play better, right? But aren't
Mhm.
sure maybe how to do that, or they've kind of reached a ceiling of kinds or a wall of sorts. It does make me think
Or
of,
you start to believe the fallacy that you just don't have the gift.
right, they think that's as far as they can go.
Yep, just wasn't for me.
It does maybe this is too far out there, but it does strike me like I've thought often before that I was very, very lucky that I came to piping through a school program as a kid, which you can probably relate to this, right? Where like part of it is that I was a dumb kid, right? And like I was in the mode of do what you're told, go home, do your homework, show up to class every day, right? So it's
Mm,
almost like I didn't have the busyness of life to get in the way. And I also didn't even realize it was an option to not do the things I was being told to do. And so in a way, I kind of got dragged along through the first few hurdles of learning bagpipes.
mhm.
Whereas I think of an instrument I might have picked up as an adult. I've got an accordion sitting next to me here. And in all honesty, Andrew, I worked hard when I first picked up this accordion and I figured out how to play the 1, 3, 4, and 5 chords to play in C, G, and D major. And I
Nice.
kind of once I got there, I could play a lot of songs and I stopped working. And it's 10 years now, and I really don't play the accordion any better than I did 10 years ago. And I
Right.
wish I did, and I want to, but there is no curriculum or instructor or upcoming performance or anything like that to drag me through the next hurdle to achieve
Yeah.
that next like step of, you might say, freedom, fun, etc. I feel like I was very lucky to have that with bagpipes. And so I'm very sympathetic to that experience for anybody as an adult learner who comes to bagpipes kind of as a thing they're doing on their own kind of thing, right? It's a different way and it takes more work in a lot of ways, I think, to come to it in that way,
Right.
which makes me
Yeah,
think
that
of someone who did that, Barb. You talk about Barb in this chapter, and I wonder if maybe her example is a great way to talk about like how do you keep powering through and find more fun?
so Barb had a ton of crossing noises, and it was really plaguing her playing, and she's a great example of how when we, at Dojo, when we did the quantum rhythm shift and we took some time, I sort of forced everybody to take some time out and just work on the rhythm and getting actually rhythmically accurate and actually thinking about it. That was something that really greatly benefited Barb. I mean, she showed up, a couple weeks later and started playing stuff again, and like, where'd all the crossing noises go? And she didn't even,
Yeah.
I don't think she even realized it at the time. Because crossing noises are things where sometimes you have a lot of them because you're not even really hearing them yet. So
Right.
at that time, maybe Barb wasn't even really hearing that she had them. So she didn't even really notice that she didn't have them anymore. But I
Mm.
noticed they were all gone.
So
And it
did
was
you
great.
like did you proactively point it out to her? Because you do mention in here, you say the true fun sometimes is actually making progress. You see and feel those amazing results that come from moving toward creative freedom. So did you have to point that out to her actively, or did she like realize it eventually?
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, yeah. And we were certainly very active pointing it out during,
Mm.
beforehand when she had tons of crossing noises. That was the takeaway from every lesson, right? You got to fix the crossing noises. And she's like, oh, okay. Then you got to fix the crossing noises. Oh, okay.
Mm.
Crossing noises are your fingers aren't moving. And so that gets very frustrating. And then there you go. How do you get past that? It turns
Mm.
out working on crossing noises, maybe that'll get you past it, but it's way less efficient than getting to the root of the problem and addressing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then a lot of pipers and piping teachers have a problem or have challenges getting to the root of the problem.
Yeah, that's key, isn't it? You and I have talked before about my serious problem with F doublings that I could never get. F doublings are killing me.
Right.
Um, not
Which
as
is
that's
in
not
itself, to me, when I hear somebody say that, I'm like, oh, they're clearly not understanding the problem.
right, yeah, and I'm not suggesting that like, an F doubling is what you'd call a high level problem, but, the whole idea, right, is that any problem if you can get to the root of the problem, that's how you'll fix it. And so maybe
Your
the reason
bad
I've
F
gone so many
doublings
years.
yeah, your bad F doublings are a symptom of the real problem,
Yeah, right. Yeah. So
which is,
got to drill down and
probably
find that.
yeah, well, and I can tell you what it is. As someone, because everybody has the F doubling problem, right? The root of the F doubling problem is almost certainly just a rhythmic inaccuracy problem, right? And then it may be compounded a little bit by less than optimal grace note technique, but probably not. It's usually just rhythm. Once we fix it, the F doublings aren't a problem anymore. And that was
Well, it
true
seems
for me. I had that same epiphany. I wasn't terrible at F doublings, but they were inconsistent. And then I just, I don't really miss them anymore.
hmm. You don't miss them anymore.
Yeah.
Good for you.
I remember Jack Lee told me that one time. He was like, I remember one year I didn't miss a single embellishment.
That was
And
a good
he
year.
wasn't bragging. He wasn't bragging or joking. He was just like,
Just
yeah,
looking back.
those are the good old days.
That's
And like now he misses 1 out of 10 billion. So
it's it's his. I suddenly can't remember the name of the famous crooner who's saying, "I did it my way" and stuff like that. What was that guy's name?
Sinatra?
Was that Frank Sinatra?
I don't
Yeah,
know.
he had the
Yeah.
song. It was a very good year, and something like Jack Lee singing like, "When I was 32, I didn't miss a single embellishment. It was a very good year."
Yeah. It's probably not untrue.
Mhm.
See what I did there?
Well, going on in the chapter, you talk about how similar to the way that vowels and consonants function
Hmm.
in what a symbiotic relationship in the English language, we've got the melody layer functioning in music with what the rhythmic stuff as well. Is that kind of the vowel consonant thing?
Say that again.
Is it that we have the melody is our vowels and then the timing between notes is our consonants? Is that kind of the idea there?
Sort of. So that yeah, so in speech we have vowel sounds that it fills the space, right? And
Hmm.
then generally speaking, our consonants are what articulate those vowel sounds. And fascinatingly, it's the consonants that give meaning to words more than anything else. We have several vowel sounds. I think I forget what the number is, like 13 different vowel sounds
Hmm.
that we use in the English language or something like that, and that's really it. And then we have a variety of consonant sounds and combinations that we use. For example, cat, right? Is the vowel sound, right? And then ca, the C sound is what starts the word cat. But then the T sound at the end is another consonant articulation. And by the way, I don't know anything about language at all, so this is probably really
Uh,
insulting some
I was
people.
hoping we are going to start talking about the centum centum divide with the letter C or something. I thought you were
But
just into
no,
that.
it would be great to, in another life, look into this
Yeah.
more. But yeah, so then you have T at the end of the word cat, and then that's what makes the word cat. And then fascinatingly, if I change the T to a P sound, cat, its meaning is wildly different.
Such a tiny change there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if you think about it in terms of time duration, right?
Mhm.
The time it takes to say the letter T is, I don't know, a tenth of a second or something or less, right? And same with the letter P. So in terms of time duration, that tiny little tiny change totally changes the meaning of the word. However, think my point here is that bagpipe melodies are very similar. So we have
Mm.
our melody notes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, G. No, at G it goes back. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, back to A, etc. So we have those melody notes. We don't have that many of them on the bagpipes. So we've got these melody notes that we play. And then we have these grace notes and perhaps ultimately some embellishment that comes in and can articulate those notes. But that's really our repertoire, right? And then the
Mm.
grace notes should be thought of as articulations, just like consonants articulate vowel sounds.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not trying to knock our instrument, of course, but we only have so many notes. Of course, then again, too, if you think about it, right? All of Western music really has the same notes. It's just whether or not we have like more octaves of those same notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, those changes of how you articulate those notes, that's a big part of what makes the difference from one tune to the next, isn't it?
a lot of times pipers lament that we only have 9 notes, but we also have shockingly few um, articulations as well, ways we can articulate the notes. Where if you take a violin, for example, you can bow it, you can pluck it. What else can you do? You can put those little the little vibrator machines on it. Have you ever seen
Mm,
those that
mm.
make those long things? I feel like there's more. Oh, you could strum it.
Well, totally, you could strum it, yeah, for sure.
Mhm. Yep, and the same with the trumpet, right? You could tongue the note. You could just initiate the note without the tongue, and then you could also play legato. So there's like a whole bunch of options there. But yeah, bagpipers have very, very limited arsenal of things
Mhm.
that we can do.
Well, so then looking at the melody itself, you say in here, playing a well-articulated melody is pretty straightforward. Step 1, and this is just step 1 of 2, so it's a pretty quick little list. Step 1, play those melody notes with no unwanted interference sounds between the notes,
Mhm.
i.e., no crossing noises.
Correct.
And step 2, play all the grace notes infinitely small to articulate that melody without interfering with the melody. That can be hard to do. That's
Yeah,
keeping them tight enough that they don't start blobbing over into the melody and getting in the way of it. That's a challenge.
that's right. And the default value for a grace note is what we call infinitely small,
Mm.
right? So, and then Jim, I don't know, maybe on the edit you can bring up the somewhere we have the illustration of that.
Yes,
Oh
sir. I'll
yeah.
pull that up for you a bit.
Yeah, we've got the illustrations in the book just about the consequences of what happens if you play melody or grace notes bigger than infinitely small. Becomes quite
Hmm.
problematic, right? So if the grace notes become too big, they start to interfere with the melody notes. Two things can happen, right? Number one is the time duration of the grace note can swallow up small melody notes,
Hmm.
and that happens all the time, right? I'll give you a little demonstration.
Load
Jim's
up.
no, because this makes it to edit harder. No.
No
We'll do a little
problem.
demonstration. So, the flat from flauta, right? If you play grace notes too big, we get this. Right? I'm actually playing flat from flauta brilliantly there. I am. It's a true story. I'm going to change nothing except for the length of the grace notes now, and you're going to hear a big difference, right? Seriously. I was playing great before. I was just purposely making one small mistake. And now it sounds like this. Right? Brilliant. Come on, Jim. You got to hand it to me. That was pretty good.
So, so you're saying
So
that any of us might have a brilliant performance that's just being hidden behind this veil of too big grace notes that are
it's,
too big.
it's not super likely. There's likely this shrinking of your grace notes is going to reveal a whole bunch of crossing noises.
Yeah.
Right. So, however, but yes, conceptually, right. So, conceptually, well, and then certainly we need the grace notes to be very small. So, going back to the big grace note example, right? Where's the melody there? You can hear how the melody is frustratingly difficult to grasp, right? Okay, that's because the grace notes are so big that we're almost starting to get if those grace notes are so big, they start to sound almost like melody notes themselves,
Yeah.
right? So now we have this miscellaneous weird grace note pattern, okay, that doesn't have anything to do with the melody interrupting everything.
Yeah.
Okay? And then also because the melody notes are so big, we can't really hear the rhythm, right? Like where does the beat go on a grace note that's very long? Is the beat at the beginning of the grace note or at the end? And it doesn't really matter what you pick because it sounds terrible anyway, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, if you have short notes, they tend to get swallowed up, right?
Yeah.
So that little short E, we like that E, but we're not hearing it really, are we? Because the G grace note is so big, right? It has to eat into something, right? So if these grace notes are on a short note, it's going to eat into those short notes. So we're not going to be able to hear them anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, meanwhile, if we manage to get our grace notes very small, Right now we can hear all those notes that we want to, and we can even play those nice fancy embellishments in there, and it's actually doing something for the cause because the grace notes are being well played.
Yeah, that sound
Mhm.
is just such a familiar sound that working through it with grace notes that are too big. And it occurs to me too that like because the rest of us are pipers and know the tune, we can like work with that in our heads. We can go, okay, well, I know how it's supposed to go, but that's not what we want, right? We don't want our listeners to be having to interpret what we're playing into what we intended it to be. We want to be playing a thing that the focus isn't up here doing work. It's, on the music
Yeah,
that we're making and enjoying that music directly.
that's a great point. Yeah.
Do-
You don't want to have to say to your audience, trust me, guys, this is really good music you're about to hear.
right. Yeah.
But bagpipers do that all the time, you
yeah.
know?
we
And
do.
P-Brock is a great one, right? P-Brock, by the way, don't let me go down a rabbit hole here. Just want to touch on this one really quickly.
Yeah.
P-Brock's such a great example of that. It's so, guys, I'm now going to go into a 13-minute explanation about why you should find listening to this P-Brock interesting,
Yeah.
right? And then you do it, and then everyone's like, whoa. And it's like, what did you like about the P-Brock? It's like, well, I could really hear the battle. And it's like, okay, cool. So you needed that 13-minute introduction for it to be explained to you why that was cool. Now, meanwhile, it's my opinion that great P-Brock players, they can play any P-Brock and it's exciting to listen to. The explanation's cool, but you don't need it.
Right. Yeah, it is a great joke that if your explanation about the Pbrook takes longer than playing the Pbrook, maybe something's not going right.
Right, exactly. Right, exactly. And
Um,
it's or another one is you hear like this horrible tune, right? And it's terrible. But then so when they stop, they're like, that was a tune I wrote for my grandmother's 95th birthday. And everyone's like, oh, that Piper was just the greatest. Yeah.
yeah.
I roll.
That's lesson learned. Every tune you ever write, dedicate it to somebody in a very heart-wrenching way, and nobody will ever say anything mean about your tunes.
Yes, that's the secret. That's the secret. Well, and even better, taking this away from joking, being slightly more legit, the best tunes are the ones that have a wonderful melody that can stand alone on its own. And then oftentimes they can be augmented with a great story. Like the Battle of the Somme is like a perfect example,
Yeah.
or the Bloody Fields of Flanders, or, like any of these historical tunes that at least purportedly represent these great historical events or people, stuff like that. It can be
Mhm.
pretty cool.
So, what about size and sync? That's a little thing that comes up in this chapter. We talked about
Yeah,
size. That's our infinitely small thing, right?
correct.
So, what's the sync part of this size and sync?
So originally, back in the caveman days, grace notes probably were only used in the beginning. Grace notes were probably only used to separate two of the same note in a row.
Mm,
That's the initial use of a grace note. So if you have Twinkle Little Star, right? Each melody note is doubled. But we can't do that with our tongue on the bagpipes, can we? So we have to separate those notes in some way. And so, grace notes came out, and they probably were originally mostly strikes.
mm,
Something like that,
that
right?
makes sense.
And so, like, primitive bagpipe music probably sounded like that, right? And then over time, you'd probably make other discoveries. Oh, I can actually do a grace note from above the note, right? Right. And then probably over a little bit more time, you started to realize actually, this trigger finger on my left hand, that's like really my best option. So then you would have, because like basically, almost regardless of what note I'm playing, I always have that G grace note I can use. So suddenly that's like
Right.
your go to guy,
Mm,
probably. But then even further on down the line, you probably start to realize that I can actually play grace notes even if I don't need them, right? And it can add organization and texture to the music. And that I think over time has evolved into what I would now call the bagpipe grace note system, right? G grace notes, D grace notes, strikes, E grace notes, stuff like that. And they're all organized in a very specific way. But anyway, as soon as you start playing grace notes, when you don't need them and during a note change, okay, now that infinitely small grace note has to be perfectly aligned with the moment that you change notes, okay, or you're going to run into trouble. So, for example, going back to the flat from flauta example, right? We have that G grace note to C in the beginning, right? We're coming from E to C with a G grace note. Now, if I don't play that in sync, right? I'm playing all those G grace notes out of sync to the C. Jim, it looks like you froze. Oh, hey, Jim.
Sorry about that. The last I could see, at least, was you about to play with your grace notes out of sync.
Right, exactly. So when I was playing from flauta there, and I'm just playing a simple version here. Sorry, that was bad. Let me do that again. So much for never missing anything for a whole year. Okay, something like that. So we're going from the E down to the C like that. Okay, now, if my grace note goes out of sync with the note change, we start to hear stuff like this. So I'm changing to the note, and then the grace note is happening. By the way, an astute listener would also recognize that you could have the grace note come in before the note change as well. It's something like that, right? Where the grace note is actually firing a little bit early. Maybe that's a little bit more rare, but it totally happens.
Sometimes it sounds
Okay.
kinda cool, though, honestly. If you were doing that on purpose, consistently, I'd be
Right.
like, "Hey, that's kinda cool."
Exactly. Well, and in that case, I am doing it on purpose for demonstration.
Right,
So
right, yeah.
that makes me very cool,
Yeah, there you go.
right?
Gonna
Right,
take that
internet?
compliment.
Right, internet? Yeah, exactly. Please confirm in the comments. All right,
Mm,
so the grace notes go out of sync there. So there's two things we need in order for a grace note to be a good grace note. We need it to be infinitely small. And if it's happening during a note change, we need it to be synchronized to happen at the exact same time.
mhm.
Fun, fun times.
Yeah. So, when taking these concepts and putting them into practice, I think that is probably very tempting, it certainly is for me, to think to myself, "Alright, this is great advice. Next time I'm learning a tune, I'll try to keep this in mind."
Hmm.
But you suggest in the chapter, I ought to take these ideas and apply them to tunes I already know.
Yes,
That's what I ought to be doing.
agree.
Just wanted to bring that up in case anybody like me is thinking to themselves, "Oh, okay, I'll apply this next time I learn a tune." No, maybe go back in the parade repertoire, the current competition medley, whatever it is. Maybe try kind of refreshing these tunes with these concepts in mind might be very useful as a practice.
Especially if you're in a rut with your tunes or your practice and you're not quite sure what to do next, a great thing to do would be simplify the tunes that you know are really easy for you and really familiar. Simplify them down to basic grace note settings. And then, yeah, work on that absolute rhythmic accuracy, work on the absolute accuracy of your note changes and the absolute infinitely small nature of those grace notes, and just start to think about it each day. Those are the foundations. And we talked about, Jim, he's got F doubling problems. No, he doesn't, right? He has problems with his fundamentals, and that's manifesting in the bad F doubling.
Yeah,
True story, right? So
true
what would
story.
most people do? Most people would just practice some F doubling exercises in vain, not to see much improvement. Does that sound familiar, Jim?
Yeah, as I have done,
Yeah.
yes.
So most people would practice the F doublings in vain, see no real improvement, and then put down the pipes and go watch Oprah.
Always Oprah. That's always what I go to.
Right. Well, now it's Ellen, but
Nope,
yeah.
reruns of Oprah.
Oh,
Just watching
reruns. Oh,
President Oprah, that's what I watch every time.
exactly. Well, there you go. And you get an F doubling, and you get an F doubling. It's going to be great.